Hej och välkomna till ett nytt avsnitt av Tangentbordsnack blir det ju den här veckan då. Med mig och prata om det så har jag Fredrik, välkommen.
Hej, tack. Det är kul att vara här.
Ja, absolut. Och för er som inte vet det så har vi senare tid bara snackat väldigt mycket tangentbord. Vi har gått igenom hur jag köpte ett Ergodox och hur jag har liksom använt det. Och med oss idag så har vi faktiskt en spännande gäst som just har med tangentbord att göra. Så jag tänker byta språk till engelska nu och så kommer vi att introducera våran gäst. Och så hoppas jag att ni tycker att det här är lika intressant som jag kommer tycka att det är. And with that I want to say hello to Erez. Is it Erez or Erez? Or how do you say
Erez.
Erez Zukerman, right?
Yep. Hello.
Hello. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm super happy to be here.
Right. So tell me, who are you and why are we calling on you when we want to talk keywords?
So basically I'm the guy behind the Ergodox EZ. That's the short answer. I did not make up the Ergodox design. That was Dominique Bouchamp. But what's cool is that it's an open source design, and a few years back, I had the idea of why not make this into a product. And one thing led to another, and here we are with the Ergodox in commercialized form, which I kind of made happen along with my partners. I have partners too. Dmitry Slepov, that guy behind Tibbo.com, and Andrew Aitken, who is an intellectual property lawyer in the US. And together we made this thing happen.
And that's the Ergodos EZ.
That's right.
Right. So this is the keyboard I have and I bought, and I actually ran into this researching ergonomic keyboards. And you say that the design is open source. Do you know the history of that design a bit, or were you involved in like early days of the actual Ergodox design as well?
I was not actually, not at all. So basically where my story starts was with me wanting a keyboard, and
as it usually does, right?
I think so, yeah. And that was way back in 2015. And the only option at the time was to wait for a drop to open on Mass Drop, which would happen maybe once every 6 months, and then get a box of parts for like $200, which was a lot of money for me to pay for a box of parts, and then try to solder it, and good luck. And that didn't really work out for me, and I figured I must not be the only one. So in terms of historical parallels, I would say, I actually haven't spoken to Dominic myself, but just looking at the design, it seems quite inspired by the Kinesis Advantage keyboard, which is also ortholinear and bowl-shaped, and I believe it predates this design. But again, it has the built-in curve, whereas the Ergodox design is flat. But you can really see strong parallels in the shape of the thumb cluster and in the ortholinear keys and so on.
Was this your first like ergonomic keyboard that you wanted to try, or was this just a part of that like journey for you to find another new keyboard?
So basically when I was, I don't know, maybe somewhere 13, 12 or so, my dad bought me the first ever ergonomic keyboard that I ever had, which was the Microsoft Natural, the original Microsoft Natural.
Oh, yes. The battleship.
And he wasn't a techie or anything like that. I think he just got it because it was cool and expensive, so he got it. Like, why not? And I really liked it, and that is the keyboard I cut my teeth on. Long nights in IRC and role-playing games and all that. And I typed a ton of that, and after that, I would only type on ergonomic keyboard, like specifically the Microsoft Natural, for many years. And then at one point, that was over a decade later, I decided, okay, I better upgrade. And then I got that Kinesis board. I got the Kinesis Advantage 2, and I got it blank at the time, blank keys, which was very cool for me. And I went from being able to type 120 words per minute to being able to type 10 or so, because there was nothing on the keys and the shape was all different. It was quite the learning curve. But I kept at it, and somewhere in there I actually converted over to Kodsnack, which is a different keyboard layout from QWERTY. And also really helps with my comfort. And so by the time I kind of happened on the Ergodox and started thinking about it, I had a good amount of experience with keyboard ergonomics, like just typing on those keyboards. And the Kinesis also has some limited programmability, which of course I used. It didn't have at the time a PC application, but you could kind of program on the board itself. And that's kind of what led to it.
That's interesting. I have a similar. I also started with. I actually had some really bad RSI problems for a while, and I found Microsoft Natural Keyboard that way. And for me, it was switching both to that keyboard and switching to a Dvorak layout, which I did. That kind of helped me. And since then, I also have only been comfortable with the ergonomic keyboards. I had a truly ergonomic keyboard for a while. And that was my first interaction with the ortholinear keyboards.
Mm-hmm.
And that keyboard was fantastic, but crap quality. It was a great keyboard, but the quality, it broke down. I managed to break the keyboard with the firmware, and it was just a mess in terms of quality. So, and that's when I ended up with the Matthias Ergo Pro for a long time, which is a great keyboard. It's just not any customizability at all.
And it's a cool company too, I have to say. They're Canadian. I spoke to them. Really nice people.
Right. Yeah. It's a good keyboard. Like if you don't want to go for the full strange experience that maybe the Ergodox can be sometimes, like the Matthias is a good step between, I would say. But then, like when that keyboard gave up, I started to look around again, and these days the ergonomic mechanical keyboard is it's still a niche, but there are options these days, right? You have the Ergodox as you're working with. We have the Keyboard IO, and we have Ultimate Hacking Keyboard or something like that. It's called, I think, that are coming out soon as well, which are all based on similar principles, right? So, and I eventionally bought the Ergodox because it was the one that was actually shipping.
Right, that's that. We do have that going for us.
No, that's a great. Do you in terms of like the company, you just felt like you didn't want to do the soldering yourself and all that, so that's when you started to look into creating like Ergodox EZ, or?
Yeah, I mean, it started with that, and then I took a step back and I said, well, I must not be the only one, right? I mean, I'm sure there's other people out there who would be willing to spend a lot of money on a keyboard because they understand how crucial it is, but they're not going to spend a lot of money on a box of parts, which they may or may not succeed in putting together.
Right.
And so, that was kind of the germ of the idea. And I was lucky enough to have the right contacts, because I think what most people do when they have an idea like that, it's like, if you don't have contacts in manufacturing already, then, well, good luck. You go to Shenzhen, you go to China, and you try to find an OEM, and hopefully you get lucky, I mean, hopefully they don't screw you over, and hopefully quality is good enough and all that. And that's a huge amount of risk I was able to avoid because I already knew the right people and the right company I wanted to partner with. I mean, I say partner because it is a partnership. It's not an OEM situation.
Okay. And so this was not your first hardware endeavor then?
It was actually, but this is the first thing I've ever, this is my first foray into hardware. But years and years back, I used to work for this wonderful Taiwanese company, Tibo, that I mentioned at the outset, tibbo.com, and they actually make industrial equipment. And they're a small scale, very high end manufacturer. Like, they make the sort of thing, they make like industrial protocol converters, which are beautiful to look at, just to give you a sense of the company, right? So this thing is like super industrial, but they make it look nice. And then the guy running the company, Dmitry Slepov, I as soon as I had the idea, I just shot him an email. It's been years since we worked together, but we parted on great terms and we're still friends. And he said, yeah, sure, let's go for it. And then we did this he said, okay, let's see if there's a market. Can we try to crowdfund this? So I put together this crowdfunding campaign on Indiegogo, and we did. We actually funded it, which was cool. But what I'm actually prouder of is that we shipped on time. We launched on March, and we told people, by December you're going to have a keyboard on your desk if you back us now, and we did it. The first keyboards were shipping in December, and not like 2 keyboards. Like people actually got their keyboards in December.
Right. So do you think that was part of you already knowing the guys you were working? Because I mean, this is not an uncommon story, right? That you're doing a crowdfunding campaign and then you have to wait 3 years before you get your keyboard, right? That is the norm, I would say, rather than what you were able to do. So do you think that was that because you had the Ergodox design from the start? You had a good manufacturing partner? Why do you think you were able to kind of buck that trend?
It's exactly that. So it's really 2 things. One was that the PCB was, the PCB design was already existing, and I was able to send him. I was able to tell him, here's the file. What do you think? And he was able to improve on it and prototype it and so on. But that said, it's also our Ergodox, the Ergodox EZ has a number of things which were not included in the original design, which Dima actually came up with. I kind of said, hey, let's make this thing able to tent and to tilt.
Yeah.
And then Dima kind of took it and ran with it and came up with these beautiful legs and the inserts for the legs, which are also a custom part. And then I said, hey, we also need a wrist rest. And then he took it and ran with it and came up with this, what I think is a very beautiful design for the wing wrist rest. So it's not like we took an existing template and just made it, which you can't find online these days, by the way. You can't find like Chinese Ergodoxes that just took the design and just simply, make it. We added a fair bit, and really, I think the number one thing here for me was to go with the right partner and to structure the company correctly so that Dima himself is a full partner in ZSA, in our company, the company that makes the Ergodox EZ. And that completely changes the OEM dynamic, right? Because usually you have like an OEM and the OEM just wants to sell you a thing for as little money as they can while making the most money they can, and basically good luck to you, right? Whereas here the interests are aligned because this is a joint venture.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. I've been super happy with the build quality so far.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's been really good, really sturdy, and looks really nice as well. I wanted to ask you, how was there any interesting hardware problems you ran into during this process that stands out, or how hard is it to ship like a hardware product like this?
Yeah, so great question, and yes, there were. So when we first started, I'm talking like 2015, we actually, it was a time crunch. And so we went with a design and had it reviewed by a number of people in Thibaut, and they're very experienced and all so on, and started shipping it. And after we shipped a number of units, we found out that there was an edge case where in the original design, and we kept it, unfortunately, where, the keyboard is made of 2 halves, right? So you would have the right half connected to USB, and then there's a cable running between the right and the left half. If while the right half was connected, you would unplug the left half and plug it back in, you could theoretically fry your keyboard.
Oh. No.
Yes, which is a bit of a problem.
Right.
And we found that out after a few dozen keyboards had shipped.
Oh no.
All right.
So yeah, and we were just starting out. We weren't very established yet. People didn't know who we were. So this is a part of that was an interesting challenge and learning experience, because it really boiled down to communication. Okay, so this happens. What do you do? How do you explain this? And I think some companies would try to maybe turn out defensive or hide it or whatnot. And we kind of started with this thing of extreme transparency with a project. Like, it's open source, the firmware, the hardware. It's most everything is open source.
Right.
And so we just humbly communicated it and offered people free replacements, and we offered even like a reinforcement kit that you could open your own board and fix it if you wanted to, or we'd send you a new one and so on. So that was an interesting challenge, and we came through quite well. And then it's crazy, right? Because a keyboard like this is quite complicated actually inside, and it has moving parts. Each key switch is a moving part. So when we started out, we said, okay, we're going to ship this out with Cherry key switches, right? It's going to be Cherry MX key switches, the bits of key switches out there and so on. And then we found out we can't source them. We were so small and tiny back then that Cherry vendors basically said, well, we're sorry, we have like an enormous lead time. We'll be happy to sell you for a lot of money, right? Every key switch. But you're going to have to wait. You're going to have to wait maybe, I don't know, 6-8 months until we get around to shipping your key switches. And that was not feasible at all because we had people waiting.
Right.
So then we said, okay, let's look for a solution, and found Gatron, which was a different manufacturer. And then we asked people if they're okay with replacing, if they would rather wait. There was, again, this whole very kind of complex communication going on with our backers, with the customers, where they each individually could fill out a survey and say, I'd rather wait for my keyboard, I'd rather have it with such and such key switch from Gatron, and so on. And then again, we work through that, and we're able to ship people with Gatron key switches.
But you are shipping Cherry now, right?
We are, and we're not working with Gatron, which was the next interesting thing. Like, there's so many stories around that, you know. Right. So we continued on our merry way, working with Gatron, and we're very happy with them. Right. And then, you know, fast forward, I don't know, a year or maybe even 18 months later, and I start getting emails from people, right? I at the time, now I have somebody helping with support a little bit, helping with support, hopefully a lot. He's a great guy. But at the time, I was doing all the support. So then I started getting emails saying, you know, I just got your keyboard, and every time I hit the A key, I get A 3 times. And every time I have to hit the S key 5 times to get anything. Like, oh my God, what is happening? And this is an issue. This is called key chatter. This is actually a common issue in mechanical keyboards, because the way a key switch works, it's a mechanical part, and you have a physical contact being closed, right? The circuit's being closed when you tap the key. And so it's very tight tolerances. And if anything tiny is amiss, the key is going to start doing weird things. And so we started investigating, and we found out that Gatron had shipped us an entire shipment. I'm talking thousands and thousands of key switches, of Gatron brown key switches, which were bad. They were just chattering, and we changed our QA procedure. And started testing specifically for that, because we knew what to look for. Right. And we found out, wow, like they sent us like thousands of key switches which we can't use, and build us for them. And now people are waiting for these keyboards, and we can't use them. Specifically the brown ones, the Gatron brown ones, were horrible. And so again, I had to very clearly communicate to people what exactly had happened. And fortunately, we were able, by this time, we're big enough to get Cherry's attention. And we were able to establish a relationship with Cherry and basically upgrade over to Cherry key switches, which are better quality. But what was I'm still emotional about that. What really pissed me off about that was the way that Gatron treated us at the time, because we said, hey, and I have the emails to prove this, so I'm not afraid of sharing this publicly. We said, hey, listen, there's a problem with this batch. The keys are chattering. And they were completely dismissive. They're like, oh, no, it's fine. It's fine. It's not a problem. It's okay. You know, you don't have anything to worry about. But no, I mean, like, you know, these are not good. Help us, please. And they're like, nope, they're okay. It happens. That's just the way it is. And so,
do you think that is because they thought you were small enough that they could kind of get away with that? Or
to this day, I don't understand why that was. And the thing is, we dropped them. We dropped them.
Exactly.
They could have made piles of money off our keyboards because we still sell them and we're going to be around for many years. Like the company is very sustainable, and I'm not going to touch them with a 10-foot pole. Anytime in the future, no matter what they make. If they make the world's most amazing key switch, because it ended up not being about the key switches, it was about the people and the way that they regard their product and their quality.
I think that is super interesting though. Like, and I do think like this mirrors like the experiences I've seen from a lot of people trying to do hardware, that it is such a different game from doing software and doing like hardware shipping and all the problems that we have, right? And this is not uncommon, and especially getting bad shipments from third parties as well, right? That is part of the deal, I guess.
That, and another huge challenge which doesn't manifest in software at all. Right. Developing software is my refuge, because when I do that, okay, I know what's happening, and there's no with hardware. There's, to some extent, there's quality issues which you can resolve by working with better vendors. But when you get to better vendors, and really almost every vendor, you get into lead times which are just insane. And you find that you, to some extent, have to bankroll your customers and your vendors and just say, okay, I'm just going to say, yes, in 6 or 8 months, we will need thousands of these pieces. And I have to pay now,
Right.
And you buy this amount, and you basically have to kind of float the business in between until the shipment comes in. And yeah, supply chain management is hectic. Fortunately, a lot of this is what Thibaut does. So this is to an extent abstracted for me, and they're very good at it. But yeah, it's hectic.
I see. And this is probably a good point to pivot in and talking a bit about key switches while we are on that. I just looked at your website here. So you're selling all the classic cherry, MX Browns, the blues, the reds. But then you also are, I see that you're shipping Kalaya now as well. Kalaya?
Yeah.
Kalaya?
I call him kale. I don't know how to pronounce it. I say kale. Like the vegetable.
Yeah, like the vegetable. Yeah,
it's good for you.
Right. What would you say is like your favorite, like personally your favorite switch? Because I know this is like a hotly debated issue, right? Which switch you're supposed to like the most or whatever, which is best.
Right. So I have 2 favorites. So I'm fortunate enough to work from home, which means I get to use a clicky key switch because in an office my coworkers would assassinate me, but at home I can do it. So my favorite ever clicky key switch has to be the Kale Thick Gold, which nowadays you're going to find it under the name Kale Bronze, but back when we started shipping it was Kale Thick Gold, and the name stuck, and I think it's hilarious, so we just kind of kept the name. Right. I think it's just a great name for it. It's such a gangster name for a key switch. It's a thick gold.
Yes.
So we kept the name, and it's an amazing key switch. It's like typing on popcorn. Seriously, like it clicks on the downstroke. Yeah. It's man, maybe I have some too. No, I'm actually gonna. I don't have any. Wait, hang on. Wait, I do actually. Right here. Okay, listen to this. Yeah.
Ooh. That's a nice clicky sound.
Yeah, it's awesome. Like it's also the feel. It's a very, very crisp key switch. It clicks once on the downstrokes, and it actually clicks again when you release. So you get 2 clicks. Here, if I do it slowly, then downstroke, upstroke. That was
I hear that
down.
A little,
yeah.
Nice.
Because the downstroke is a very similar sound to the blue one. Like
that's right.
Right.
That's right. But yeah, this thing is like, because you get 2 clicks for every keystroke, it sounds like you are, you're like that guy from Ghost in the Shell, typing with like 40 fingers. It's kind of awesome. Yeah. So that's definitely that's my favorite clicky switch.
Right.
And these days, my favorite silent switch has to be the MX Speed Silver. That's a speed switch, which means it actuates higher on the downstroke. Like you don't really have to bottom out. You can really tap very lightly because the actuation point is so much higher on the switch. And it's just a pleasant, linear, quiet switch. And this is what I'm typing on right now. Like this is the one I have connected to my computer. So yeah, those are my two absolute favorites, personally speaking.
Yeah, for sure. I'm a Shure MX Blue, and I think that this is kind of one of the things that I would love to like be able to. We were actually talking about this, like how hard it is to know how that switch is going to feel until you have it in front of you, right? So that's why I went for a very known MX Blue one, because I know exactly how that is going to feel and sound, right? And I think that is why a lot of people, I wouldn't be surprised if your most sold switch is the MX Brown.
Yeah, I think it is too. And honestly, that's what I recommend people, especially now that you can change your own key switches.
Right.
So, you can start with something that's very safe. And if in the future you decide you want to experiment, you don't have to buy a new keyboard. You just get a bunch of switches.
Yeah, that is a really good feature of the Ergodox EZ. And I understand that requires some extra special magic also in the PCB to make it possible for you to switch the switches, so to speak.
Yeah, actually, the interesting part there. So yes, of course, we needed to use sockets, and we used sockets from Kale. And these sockets are compatible with any cherry compatible key switch. So that was a known thing. Okay, let's change the PCB. Let's put in those sockets.
Right.
And then we ran with it, and I got a prototype to test, and I put in a key, and the key stopped working. And I'm like, okay, what happened here? So I open up the prototype, and I look, and I see that the socket, basically the key pushed the socket out of the PCB, right? And it stopped working. I'm like, okay, we cannot ship this, right? This is not going to work out. And so what we had to do, and if you open your keyboard, you'll see this. What we had to do is we had to change the tooling, the plastic. And basically now, the keyboard is like a sandwich. You have the top cover and you have the bottom plate, the bottom plastic.
Yeah.
So the bottom plastic, the bottom plate has raised supports. It has ridges that actually touch exactly each and every key switch socket on the PCB. They match up against the PCB.
Right, so it shouldn't fall off.
Exactly, it can't, because each and every socket has direct support from the plastic. So that's the type of thing which is sometimes also surprising in manufacturing. Like really, manufacturing is just full of surprises. And I think many, again, this goes back to the OEM relationships, and many OEMs try to kind of maybe abstract that or hide that or give you the feeling that everything is predictable when it's not. And working with a real partner, it's like, okay, let's do this together. And now, this arose and there's full transparency there. And it turns out to use these sockets on the circuit, we have to change the plastic, which is kind of a surprising thing. And that's, obviously a big investment as well, just in the plastic and prototyping and all that. But we went for it, and I'm super happy that we did, because it's two things really. This change it yourself, right? One thing is obviously the flexibility,
right? But
the other thing is that we offer a 2-year warranty, and it's a crazy comprehensive warranty. But I don't want the keyboard to 2 years is 2 years. I want you to use this keyboard for a decade,
right?
And what's going to fail on you without a doubt is the moving parts, right? Just by dint of just because they're moving, right? So I think being able to just grab a tool, pull a key switch out just like you pull a tooth, and plop a new one in, and your keyboard works again, even if it's 5 or 6 or 8 years old, I think that's huge. And I hope to see these keyboards in the wild, in 15 years, honestly.
For sure. Yeah, that is super interesting. Like now I get really interested in buying one of those thick gold switches and see how it feels. Because I'm very happy with the MX Blue ones, because I also work from home, so I don't have to mind other people's. But my wife had very specific complaints about the keyboard the first time I used it when she was home.
I hear that's always interesting to hear. Like, some people write in and actually explain about their significant other's preferences, and like, oh, my wife loves those thick golds, and she likes that sound. It's funny. It's definitely a factor. Yeah, I mean, They have to listen to you all day long, right? So I hear that.
Sure. I wanted to pivot a bit to the actual software. I understand that basically the original Ergodox design doesn't really have you don't have to run QMK, which is the quantum mechanical keyboard, right? There are options there, but you went with QMK. Was there a specific reason behind that move or that choice?
Absolutely. And that again comes back to people. So at our very beginning, we were just starting out and I had to figure out the firmware aspect, right? So Thibaut was doing the hardware and I had to figure out what is this thing going to run and all that. And I looked around and there was TMK, which was the granddaddy that was like the original. And I poked around and then I found at the time it wasn't called QMK actually. It was, I think, a fork of TMK. It was very, very early days, but it was a fork and it could do interesting things. And so I wrote the guy behind it and I was like, hey, I'm doing this thing with the Ergodox. Do you want to maybe help me with the firmware? I don't code C. I'm your garden variety Rails and React JavaScript developer. I am not a C guy. So I needed help and I wrote this guy just randomly. And he replied, and his name is Jack Humbert. He's the guy behind olkb.co. And he is basically the nicest guy ever. Just a super awesome guy. And he was, it's really interesting. It like, I guess one testament to his character, I make computer keyboards. Theoretically, I'm a competitor. Right. The keyboard's different, right? But I'm this guy basically writing him saying, hey, can you help me with my firmware to make this keyboard? And, and he makes them, right? He makes them for a living. And I think many people would say, well, nope, sorry, good luck to you, right? But Jack is just such a charming guy. Like he replied in like, absolutely for sure. And he engaged me and he helped us big time developing the original firmware to get it to run correctly on the Ergodox. And we had this beautiful collaboration at the time where before I got into programming, I used to be a writer. I used to be a translator, and then I used to be a blogger, actually, for PC World and for Make Use Of. So I had a strong back, and I did some technical writing and so on. So I started helping him with the documentation. And we would pair, and I would sit down and kind of really just write a bunch of docs. And since then, he like, basically those docs surprised me in a sense, because when I used to think about contributing to an open source project, my thinking was with code. Obviously, I would tackle issues and PRs and code and whatnot. And here I couldn't do the code, so I did the docs. And I was shocked at the impact it had, because over time, QMK exploded in popularity. And that's because A, of course, it's a very, very good piece of firmware, but B, I really think that high quality documentation was a turning point for the project, and many people got involved. At the time, it was just the README on the site, and it made the firmware so much more accessible to people, and then it started picking up pace, and today I think it's pretty much the #1 mechanical keyboard firmware on the planet, and it has this very rich ecosystem of contributors, like hundreds of contributors and great features and many, many keyboards that run it. And I'm super happy to have been there at the start with Jack. And I think this is another wonderful example of why it's so important and helpful to be genuinely nice, because Jack he's just, again, like a wonderful person, and that carries through to everything he does, be it his great firmware. He makes the Planck keyboard, which is an awesome mechanical keyboard, or the firmware. And yeah, so basically the deciding factor there was really chemistry and being able to work together and thrive together. And to this day, we're great friends, and it's a lot of fun to work together.
Yeah, because I was surprised on I will get to that with the configurator later, but I chose to go the path of actually, writing the C code. I'm a C programmer myself, so it wasn't a big step for me to kind of understand the structure and build my firmware myself and all that. And I was surprised on actually, as you said, like how good the documentation was, because it feels like every time I have a question, I can just go to the documentation and get it answered. So that is really nice. I really enjoy the fact that the key maps are stored on the keyboard. as I've been running a variant of Dvorak in 15 years or something like that, one of the biggest pain points I have with that is to install the key map on every new computer I get, right? And
Absolutely.
Especially if I run Mac on that, Linux on that, Windows on that, it's just a mess to get it to use the same key map everywhere. So being able to carry that with the keyboard has been really nice from that perspective to not have to have the files and install them and deal with that.
Right, that's awesome. That's awesome. And by the way, speaking of firmware, I just want a shout out to your audience here. If any of you guys wants to work on the firmware, these days now that we're bigger, there are actually some paid opportunities around the firmware. If anyone's interested, feel free to drop me a line because that could be fun as well.
That's awesome. Yeah. So one thing I wanted to talk a bit about is the web interface, because that is Ergodox EZ invention, right? Or program, right? So you ship this and it basically downloads, it compiles the firmware for you and all that from the website.
Yeah, it's a Rails app.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How, did you feel like that was a necessity for shipping the product, or was that something?
Absolutely, absolutely. That was absolutely crucial, and that actually started out as an open source project by a developer, and I'm embarrassed to say I don't remember his name right now. The name just slipped my mind. I was trying to think of his name for a few minutes now, but also a really nice guy. And then he made this very initial proof of concept, which kind of rendered the keyboard and didn't really do so much. And then and I took it and ran with it, and then I asked for his permission to close source it because I felt that is one element I do need to close source. Mm-hmm. And he gave me that permission. I gave him a copy of the project as it was at the time, and then we closed it and kind of ran with it.
Interesting. Mm-hmm.
And there too, I have to. This is full of shout outs because success is always, I think, a team effort. So and it's really important for me to credit those people. So the configurator in the early days was actually we created with a very advanced methodology that I call favor driven development.
Okay. Yeah. So
it was favor driven development. I have a good friend, Maxim Gladkov is his name. He's this amazing developer in Latvia, super cool guy. And at the time, he was just willing to simply help me, and we pulled together this configurator in a number of frantic pairing sessions. And from there, we kind of kept refining it. Mm-hmm. But the initial pull to get it done was just, hey, can you please help me? And he did. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of a common thread, I would say, through this business and through bootstrapping a business, where sometimes people think you need to have a lot of structure and a lot of formality and a lot of agreements and a lot of employees. And I don't. I kind of, I got very far with the business having no employees at all. Right. Just knowing the right people and knowing how to work with them correctly and making sure everybody wins. And the configurator is an example of that.
Right. So what would you say now? You've been doing this for how many years? Have you been doing the company?
It's been, wow, I think it's on the verge of 3 or 4. It's either 3 or 4 years. I don't remember. I think 3 or 4.
Right. So you hinted throughout the discussion here that it's doing fine. You're doing well with as the company. What would you say is the state of Ergodos EZ in 2018? Is it in a good spot? Is it growing? Do you have a lot of new people interested in ergonomic keyboards these days? And
it's actually fantastic. So as I mentioned, the business is completely bootstrapped. I'm not a big fan of venture capital and what it does to companies. I kind of go, my inspirations are very much 37 Signals, which are now Basecamp, right? THH, and the way they do things. So I set out to build a business, and it's working. Like, we're growing and growing. It's not a hockey stick, because I'm not looking for the hockey stick, right? I'm looking for sustained growth, and it's just happening. And I'm super happy, basically. We're not this huge business, like, oh my God, making bazillions. We are just a really, company with, I know it sounds kind of terrible. It sounds really pretentious, but there really is a craftsmanship aspect to what we're doing. So we're not necessarily, and it's hard, right? It's hard to be craftsman and mass market selling to everyone, great for everyone. No, we're not great for everyone. We're for specific people, and for those people, we give our hearts and souls, and it's been working out.
That's super cool. Super cool. Happy to hear that. What would you say to people who we have had a lot of people discussing in our Slack channel and around on Twitter and so on, like why should I buy a keyboard for almost $300 when I can get one for 50? Or how do I convince my employer to get me one of those? What would you say is the best reason you can come up with to kind of go for investing in a keyboard like that?
So those are actually two quite different questions. I'm going to take the first one because to me that's really the heart of the matter. Mm-hmm. Why spend a crazy, why spend $300 on a keyboard? That's nuts. And here too, we can split it up into two things. Why does the keyboard even cost $300? I think that's a question people should ask themselves. Right. Why is it so expensive? In our case, it's so expensive because of what I explained, because Thibaut, we make it in an office building in Taiwan by employees who get fair wages. It's not made in some OEM factory in China by contractors that I don't know who they are and what they get, right? So it's crazy expensive to make the keyboard. And really, I'm not going to get into the numbers of my actual costs, but when I do mention it in private conversation, people are shocked at how much I get for a keyboard versus how much I have to pay Thibaut to make the keyboard. The ratio is so close that most businesses would not even survive on the margin I kind of have. Right. Because again, I'm not trying to get rich, and I work from home, and I don't have many employees and all that. So that's one thing. The keyboard costs a lot of money. Mm-hmm. And I think it matters why. Not because we have a Nike ad budget and we pay models to hang out with a keyboard and look great,
That would be awesome though.
Yeah, for sure. But I'd rather spend the money on paying fair wages to the people who make the keyboard and on sourcing really good parts like our keycaps. It's funny, it's just plastic, right? It's just keycaps on the keyboard. Right. You would be shocked at how much they cost. You can get a sense for how much they cost us if you go to pipmykeyboard.com, because that's also Signature Plastics. That's the same manufacturer. And they make them in the US. And you can imagine how much that costs. So
those keycaps, I should tell, is something different than the keycap you find on your garden variety keyboard. For people who didn't know there's a difference in a keycap, there is a big difference in a keycap as well. So
cool, thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Especially I have the blank sculpted ones, and I think that those really feel super nice when they are a bit sculpted after wear on the keyboard they are. I really do enjoy those, and the little surface friction you get from the coating you use. Really nice keycaps for sure.
That's awesome.
I'm super happy I went with the blank ones as well, because that was one of the things that I was debating with myself.
That's awesome. So that's the first thing. I think when you go to buy something really expensive, one of the things to understand is, why does it cost so freaking much, So that's one part. And I think when you really understand why and you understand what goes into it, that helps. And then there's, of course, your personal need. Okay, so what are we measuring up against? I would say if a $50 keyboard, or if the keyboard you already have gets you where you need, you're completely happy with it, do not spend even $50 on a new keyboard, right? Because why have more stuff? I don't know. This is getting into more personal territory, but in terms of consumerism, our footprint on the planet and all that, seriously, if you don't need a new keyboard, don't get a new keyboard, not even mine. If you're happy with what you have, that's awesome. And then if you do need a new keyboard and trying to understand to decide between a $20 or a $50 keyboard off Staples, or I don't know what you have in Sweden. What's the Swedish Staples?
Well, yeah, we have something called I don't know. We don't really have those anymore, right? It's Teknik Magazine, which is the I don't know.
Like just an office supply store, like where you go to buy your printer
Right.
and your.
Yeah, we have some of those, but I think we have Office Depot. That sounds really
Yeah, Office. That's a good example.
Right,
That's a great
exactly.
example.
Yeah, that one is around.
So if you go to Office Depot and you pick something off the shelf and you're happy with it,
Mm-hmm.
and you're also happy with the ethics of manufacturing it, or you don't care about how it was made, or if it serves a purpose, hey, go for it, right? Like one of the things is if you look at the copy on our website, I don't really try to convince people to buy the keyboard because it's not for everyone. And I think if I have to convince you too much, then maybe it's really not for you and you would be happier with a different keyboard or with what you already have. Basically what I do is I try to explain, okay, what is this thing? And I trust people's intelligence to decide, okay, so they have features A, B, C, D. This is how it works. Oh, that sounds awesome. I need that on my desk. Or no, that's not for me. I'm happy with my Logitech keyboard, which awesome. That's great too. So maybe like the simplest answer here is I don't try to convince you. I give you the facts and I trust you.
Right.
And if you decide not to buy the keyboard, that is a fully legitimate choice in my world.
Right. Because it is a different product, right? It's not a strict necessity product that way. Like usually most people get away with what they have. But if you're like how I reason around things like this is like, how much time do I spend in front of my keyboard? Do I want that experience to be okay, or do I want it to be the best it can be? Because I'm spending 8 to 10 hours a day in front of my keyboard, right? So from my side of view, that was the way I was able to kind of like talk myself into getting an expensive keyboard, is because I spend so much time typing on it. And I also have had problems with strain. And I think that a split hand keyboard is probably one of the best ways to reduce that strain.
I agree. Yeah,
because of the width between them, and that you can like basically configure them into whatever way you want to type, right?
Yeah, and that's definitely a factor. And I think that's part of why most of our audience, most of our customers are software developers and engineers, and we don't have all that many gamers, because really when it comes down to the economics, if you think about, okay, how much is an hour of my time, or how much do I get per month, per year, is it going to justify itself if I have a keyboard that is wonderful to use and I have zero pain issues and I can even bind, keys to be more efficient,
right?
Then you kind of look at the economics, and the economics really work out.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. The other part of my question was what's a good argument to bring to your employer to say, hey, why should I spend like $300 instead of $50 for a keyboard to my software developer or what typist or whatever?
So that varies per employer. Some employers simply have kind of a flexible spending account, which you can just say, like the very best companies, we do get a lot of companies buying, and and when you get like a name, like we have many Googlers using the product, and people from Apple and people from IBM and whatnot. I think most of those people, like when you work at a big enough company, you just go to HR and you say, hi, please get me this. And they get you whatever you want, right? I mean, you want a pink chair, you get a pink chair, whatever you want, they just get you. So that's one category of employers. Another category, which are a little bit more picky, I've seen people actually get prescriptions for the Ergodox EZ.
Right.
You go to your doctor, you show the keyboard, you explain, okay, I actually have a health need, which I can justify so and so, and this keyboard satisfies this need. Can you please prescribe it? And the doctor just looks at it, and sees, okay, this is a bona fide ergonomic device, right? It's not something you buy for the bling on your desk,
right.
And gives you a prescription. And generally speaking, I think it comes down more to your relationship with your employer and to the type of company you work at than the product itself. Because the really good employers trust their employees to spend their money wisely and to say, okay, yeah, this is going to help me. And then they treat them like grown-ups, and okay, so that's going to help you. We're going to get you this.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I know that some of the listeners in our chat was able to get a keyboard via their employer. And then he moaned about how how badly he typed the first couple of days. It was hard to adapt to the new layout. And that
For
is
sure.
that is a tip for me, from everyone who's considering getting an Ergodox, is that it takes time to adapt to that layout, for sure.
It really does. And I think I kind of treat that as I had that when I first switched to the Kinesis, because switching from Kinesis to Ergodox is super easy, but the switch to Kinesis totally obliterated my typing. And I remember, to this day, I remember my wife making fun of me because, she was used to seeing me like type, 120 words per minute. And suddenly I'm like,
exactly.
what am I even doing, And then what I did at the time, which really proved useful, is I went and I did typing practice online. And that was great. And to this day, I sometimes do it for fun because I think you can always improve. And I think it's just a good opportunity when you get a new keyboard to just really take it. Suddenly you realize, okay, this is a skill I can practice, rather than something that we take for granted, as most of us do. Just, okay, so I can type, whatever. But when you really put in the time to practice, you will get better. And even if you've been using the same keyboard for years, if you suddenly randomly decide to practice, you will get better at typing.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to wrap up so we have time for some audience questions. But I wanted to ask as a kind of a last question. So what's next for Ergodox EZ? Do you have anything interesting coming on the horizon soon, or is it just continue delivering the same awesome keyboard in greater quantities?
Yeah, so we have a number of interesting things happening. Obviously, this is tech, so you can't stand still. So I've been able to graduate on the configurator from favor-driven development to actual development. Okay. And I recently was able to hire this fantastic developer called Florian Didron. He lives in Japan. He's a French guy, lives in Japan. Amazing person. And right now we are completely rewriting the configurator from scratch, basically. And we're going to use obviously React 16.3, but also Mobix State Tree and a GraphQL API, and it's gonna be super, super nice. And at the end of this process, you will feel absolutely nothing. we're gonna deploy this, and nobody's gonna know the difference. And that's the first goal. But from there on, I think the configurator is going to be much more extensible with a much lower level of tech debt with good test coverage. So we'll be able to add many things like dragging layers around and dragging keys around and even users and comments, and I think the configurator is going to be really exciting in the next year or two. And there's a lot of work being done there. And because a lot of people say, a community is kind of an unfair advantage, right? And a lot of people say, well, why don't you make a forum and all that? And I say, well, I want the configurator to be that forum. Imagine being able to comment on keyboard layouts and ask people, hey, why'd you do this? Or maybe you want to do that, or share specific layers or share uses, and have a whole community around people who use the keyboard for 3ds Max, and key bindings for that. And so that's kind of where that's headed. And it's going super well, and I'm really excited for that. And of course, we have some hardware in the oven, which is shrouded in a super thick secrecy shroud, an Apple-like mystique, which I can't divulge and all that. But yeah, we're gonna have some new hardware for sure.
That's interesting. Yeah, I hope you're willing to maybe come on the podcast in the future as well and talk about those new cooking stuff as well.
Absolutely. I'd be happy to. Yeah.
Let's see what we asked. We put out a question in our Slack channel, and we came back with a few questions. Fredrik, do you want to ask that first one there?
Sure. So the first one was, I guess this is at least partly answered. People were wishing for more flexibility in the web configurator, especially for Nordic and non-English languages.
Yes, that is a huge pain point for me. I'm bilingual myself. My first language is Hebrew.
Oh,
And I used to be a translator for many years, and I'm embarrassed by how US centric the configurator is. And it is coming. Like, you're going to be able to pick Nordic characters. You're going to be able to actually label your own keys. Because, for
yay.
example, in Swedish, as I'm sure you know, to get angle brackets, you actually need the non-US / key.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
And then on your layout, you end up with non-US /. But no, that's your triangle brackets, your greater and lesser than.
Right.
So you're going to be able to label your own keys, and yeah, international support is definitely coming. It's very high on my list.
Sweet.
And I apologize to everyone's listening that it sucks so bad right now. I'm sorry. We're working on it. Honest.
Right. No, I think that has been one of the most asked questions in like how, because it seems like everyone who's on a Nordic language goes to hack the source code itself instead because of those issues. So I think that will make a lot of people super happy.
For sure. I mean, there is actually some. If you search for German and you search, actually, here's a secret tip.
Mm-hmm.
There is a beta Nordic mode actually. If you add a query parameter Nordic true, like Nordic equals true to the end of your URL,
Ooh.
you get a whole submenu of Nordic options in the key selector. With Nordic true, and that solves some things, and people are able to use it for German and whatnot. But yeah, I think it's definitely a pain point.
Yeah, for sure. The second question is also around the web configurator. Someone was asking, would it be possibility in the future to download and upload source code to the configurator to kind of continue to work in both places with it?
I think that's going to be a little challenging in terms of parsing the source code because we have to parse it out.
Mm-hmm.
What we will do there, that's a partial solution, but one thing I want to do is local storage. So actually, you just have the thing in your browser and it would work offline. You could work on an airplane, whatever, fantasize on your layout and kind of put it together, and you go back online and you just hit compile and it does it. So that sort of offline functionality is definitely on the roadmap. Being able to parse C files, I think that's a little bit out of scope, unfortunately.
Right. Fredrik, will you go next one?
Yeah, the next one was asking about non-English keycaps in the in general, of course, not just in the configurator.
I hear.
Physical keycaps, I think they're talking about in this case.
Yeah, so physical keycaps, that's a great question. So the keycaps we source right now from Signature, they are double shot keycaps. Mm-hmm. What double shot means is that the keycap is actually made up of two pieces of plastic. And, so they make like the base, which is white, let's say, and then they put a black part into a hole in the shape of the letter C in the tooling and fuse it together. So it's not printing, it's actually plastic that's fused together, right?
Wow. So
to make each letter, like the letter C, the letter R, whatever, you need an actual physical mold with that character. And that makes for very, very durable keycaps. Like, the printing isn't going to wear off ever because it's not printing. Like, you can use sandpaper, and in the end, you're gonna get to the black part, right? But it's plastic; it's not printing. But that also limits the ability to type, international glyphs and arbitrary characters and emoji and whatnot, because you need to have a piece of tooling for every one of that. And because we don't have direct control over this, because we work with Signature, the happy part there is that these are cherry compatible keycaps. So if you are able to source locally in Sweden, then those are going to work. Another thing we could do there, and this is another shout out, I guess, to anyone who's interested. If you know of a wonderful maker of keycaps in Sweden that you feel is up to par with our standards, like a great source for Swedish keycaps, hook me up. I'm more than happy to talk to them. And again, it's very important for me to offer great international support, being, bilingual myself. And so it's definitely something that I want to look at. It's just, where are those keycaps, and, let's source them.
Right. Another option there also is, I'm going to do shout out again the site that you talked about, Pimp My Keyboard. They have a lot of different kinds of keycaps you can buy there as well. And there are some, I think, international ones. maybe not as much, but definitely they have a lot of different colors and feels and stuff like that. So
Yeah,
that is something
for sure.
to look at as well. The next one was someone asking if you think you ever see like a distributor in Europe or something like that, so you don't have to pay the import taxes and all that.
That's a great question. We get that a lot. So my understanding, and please correct me being European, right? Please correct me. But I think, let's say now I would say, okay, Tobias, why don't you be my distributor, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I sell you the keyboard for you to sell onwards to your customers.
Right.
You still have to pay VAT when it comes into the country.
Yeah, I do, but I can pay a different rate as a gross importer. So that would be a little bit cheaper. It's not like eliminating the tax, but I do think that it's more of a psychological thing. If I'm going to have to psychoanalyze the people who write these questions, is that like it feels you buy a keyboard for 300 and then you have to pay an extra 100 when it comes to you, right?
For sure, for sure.
Even if that maybe the base price would have been 380, some people probably would prefer that anyway, just out of a psychological, thing.
Right. But the thing is, I think that it would end that is my concern. Beyond the psychology, like my concern is that, let's say you were my distributor. Okay, so that's nice. You have to pay a slightly lower VAT rate, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you have to make a living somehow.
Right, exactly.
And so you have to take your cut. So really, with a European distributor, buying a keyboard in Sweden would end up, I believe, based on, people have written in asking to be my distributors. So I did talk to them about the numbers. And what I've found so far is that the keyboard would end up costing more in Europe.
Right.
And if there's one thing I don't want to do is raise the price. In terms of, even when we add new features, like we added those change it yourself things, right? And that's extra cost for me in manufacturing, big time, not just the development, but the PCB itself gets more complex. We didn't raise the price. Right. By a cent, So I'm really, really working hard to keep the price where it is, even if our costs increase. And I think that by having a distributor, people in Europe would end up paying more than they do now. So I would rather, adhere to the numbers than the psychology in this case, even if it means, again, that fewer people buy the keyboard. I recognize that if we had a distributor in Europe, maybe more people would buy, but the keyboard would cost them more. And I feel like that's not the right value judgment to make here. I'm not into selling more just to sell more. I kind of care about how the transaction is done.
Right. Thank you very much. That was the extent of the interesting questions there, I think. And I want to thank you so much for joining the podcast and talking about geeking out with keyboards and it's super interesting to hear. Like, I think we tend to focus a lot on the software side, right? And it's super interesting to hear from the hardware side as well.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's been an honor to be on the podcast. I really appreciate your invite.
Right. Fredrik, do you have any additional questions before we?
No, I think we've covered about everything. I'll probably think of 10 more questions the second we hang up, but that's always good motivation for another episode later on. I'm looking forward to that as well. Yeah.
I would love that. Thank you so much, guys.
Yeah, thank you. And go to ergodox.ez.com, right? That's the best.
Ergodox-ez.com, yeah.
Right. And Ergodox EZ on Twitter as well, right?
Yep.
And that's usually you writing, right?
Yeah, that's me, definitely.
So that's where you can find more info, or if they have more questions, our audience and so on. And that was really fun. So thank you for that, and I'll hope to talk to you in the future.
Amazing. Me too. Have a great day.
Let me put it this way, Mr. Raymer. The 9000 series is the most reliable computer ever made. No 9000 computer has ever made a mistake or distorted information. We are all, by any practical definition of the words, foolproof and incapable of error.